the WOW room. Welcome at IE. It is our pleasure to have you here, and together we will spend the third session, the first for today, on the GDPR. And what we are going to do, we are not going simply to explain what is the law. No, we are not going to do that. But we will give you a perspective in order to understand why there was a need for a new law and what was the reality on the ground. For that reason, I have prepared a presentation. Humanity always moves forward. We had the agricultural revolution. This meant that people found new methods for the agriculture. They increased their productivity, and this meant that we have more energy in order to feed the population. The second critical element, the second critical revolution was the Industrial Revolution. What happened with the Industrial Revolution? We found new ways of manufacture. We increased manpower. If you needed an hour to go from your home to the field, now with a car, you could do that in 5 minutes. If you wanted to raise a heavy object, now with the machines, you could do it. Nowadays, it is the period, it is a transitional period, and we live in the information technology revolution. Information technology revolution is about to create, and it is creating, new values. In order to make it more tangible, this information revolution is possible because we have increased the computational power with new computers that are faster, that are smaller, that are lighter, in combination with the internet connectivity, what you have heard, the 5G. So this information technology creates new values. And what is the new value that it creates? It is data. Industrial Revolution created new values. That was always the case. For instance, during the agricultural period, horses were very critical. Horses were the central means of transportation. Horses were important for the agriculture. But then, with the Industrial Revolution, when we manufactured cars, unfortunately, horses became useless. Now we have a new value, and this value is data. Let me exemplify that with numbers. We had a poll, and almost 90% of startups, they have a business model according to which which is based on data. I have some examples. Industries that use data in the banking sector, in the insurance, in the hospitality, in tourism. Almost every new business has a model based on the collection of data. Data is about our privacy, and the right to privacy expanded. At the beginning, it was our bodily integrity. My body, I had the power to control my body. It was my home that I had privacy. Then, at the previous century, the idea of privacy changed, and we moved to the idea of personal autonomy, that each of us has the autonomy to decide and define, how their personality will be developed. It was about our sexuality, our private right to decide about our families, how we will structure our families. Nowadays, we discussed about digital privacy. It's about our power, our right to control our personal information. Whenever you open a bank, whenever you join a social network, you hand over information about you. And European Union was a pioneer. What does the EU do for you? In 1995, European Union was the first region that adopted a law regarding your data, a law about your data protection. What do we mean as personal data? As personal data, we mean any information that can lead to the ID of a person, or it is possible to lead to the identification of that person. So for instance, if you live in Italy and your name is Luigi, then if we add your last name, it is possible to identify who you are. So all this information that can lead to a natural person is what we call personal data. How do companies make money? Why do they collect the data? Companies, they make money by processing your data. What do we mean processing your data? We mean the collection of your data, we mean the recording of your data, we mean the organization of your data. And the authority, the person, the agency that decides about how your data are collected or what they do with the data, we call them data controller. A key provision in the law of the 1995 was consent. With this law, it empowered the people to consent on whether a controller will have the authority to process their data. And we had an interesting classification. We had general data or simple data, and it was enough to give your consent. Yes, I consent with the processing of my data. And then we had a more specific classification, which was the sensitive data. And for the sensitive data, which means data about your ethnic origin, your political opinions, your religious or philosophical beliefs, we needed an explicit consent. So companies, in order to process your data regarding your political affiliations, they required an explicit consent that, according to which you allow these companies to process your personal data regarding your political affiliations. That was the legal framework that was adopted in 1995. Imagine how pioneers were the European lawmakers when they adopted a law in 1995. We discussed about internet, which was very slow. We discussed about computational power that was, very small. It was a period before Facebook. It was a period before Google. And yes, the European Union foresaw that data protection is an important aspect in our life, and we need to create safeguards. However, the recent years, there was a need for a change. It was obvious that the law that was adopted in 1995 was not enough. It was a law that wasn't enough to protect our citizens. We have seen that with the Cambridge Analytica. I will mention the Cambridge Analytica later on when I will refer to Facebook. But what happened? What happened during this year, since 1995? We have technological advancement. Now we have cloud computing. Companies, they can store thousands of data, giga, in a cloud. We have social networks where people join in these networks and they hand over their personal data, photos, personal information, very sensitive personal information. We have road toll collection and GPS tracking. So with wearables, for instance, if you have an iPhone, an iWatch, or if you have a smart watch, companies can trace where you are. They can trace your exact location. So this was the technological change. And nowadays, actually, we discuss about 5G. This is the new step. In the near future, we will discuss about autonomous cars. It will mean cars that will have machines and they will be able to collect data when they will be in the street. This is the technological change. Second, we have globalization. Companies, they might have the establishment here in Europe, and they might collect data from all over the world. And on the top of that, they might save this data in another region, in India, or even in the middle of the sea. So these two main reasons, the technological development and globalization, led to the new law. The new law, the Gdpr, was a necessity. Let me exemplify that, because right now all that is theory. I will have an example from a recent situation, from the pandemic. And in the news, it was all over that Google decided to reach an agreement with Apple about merging their systems that will allow these companies to exchange data. Let me clarify that. Let me explain that. We had the pandemic, and we are living in this pandemic. What's happening? We have people who are infected with coronavirus, and it is impossible to trace their contacts. We rely on them to mention that, well, we met with our family, we met with our friends, we met with our colleagues at the office, in order to reach them and ask them, please self-quarantine for a while. You were in touch with a person who had the disease. Companies, they decided to find a different way. Based on your phone, if you had approached another person, these phones, they can exchange data, and then automatically the authorities, they can find out with whom you were in touch. What does this mean? It means that it is possible for the companies to merge digital data with analog data. So far, the information technology was based on digital data. For instance, on Facebook, you have your friends, you have the people you communicate. But these people, possibly, they are not your dearest people. Your dearest people might be your family, and you do not contact, you are not in touch with them via Facebook. It might be your colleagues, some close friends who are not on Facebook. And the companies, they didn't have the clear picture about you. They had only the digital picture about you. Now, with the merge of the digital data with an analog data, the companies, they can find out with whom you really interact. So they can have a full picture about you, about your connections, about your information. This is a very interesting technological change. Now, I will explain in a very practical way Facebook, how companies realize that data for them is the new value. I have here the terms and conditions from Facebook since 2005, and we will see how this developed and how we ended up with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. What was that Cambridge Analytica scandal? Let me explain that. Some people who were in Facebook, they were asked to fill a questionnaire. These people, they did that. They filled a questionnaire about their preferences, their political affiliations. But then Cambridge Analytica, which was behind this application, this survey, was able to withdraw information not only about the people who filled this questionnaire, but this company was able to collect information about friends of friends and in general about everybody who was in touch with this person, and they were able to collect sensitive information about their political preferences, about their concerns. So it was a third-party app that was able to collect information about you, and you didn't know about that. It is said that Cambridge Analytica data were used under two circumstances during the elections in the United States in 2016, and they were also used during the Brexit referendum. So let's see together how the Facebook terms and conditions, how the policy of Facebook changed all these years and allowed this company to collect your data. So let's go back to 2005. In 2005, we have a very simple provision about your data. What does the law say? I have it here at the PowerPoint. No personal information that you submit to the Facebook will be available to any user of the website who does not belong to at least to one of your groups specified by you in your privacy setting. What do we have here? We have here absolute control. You have a right here to control about your data, and you decide the amount of data that are shared. After a year, we have a change in the policy. Here, it's interesting to read the new provision. Facebook starts, we understand that you don't want everyone in the world to know about your data. And because of that, they give you control. But what is the catch? The default privacy policy. They change the default privacy policy and they decide to make some parts of your data public to everyone, unless you change this default policy. That was a minor change, but it shows that Facebook in 2006 realized how they can make money. 2007, we have another change. Profile information will be available, the profile information, the information that you submit to Facebook when you log in, will be available to users on Facebook who belong at least to one of your networks. And this information will be available even with a simple search. So people can search in your network and they can find you. So if you were at the UCLA network or if you were at the IE network, a person in your network could Google your name and they could find you. This is another change in their terms and conditions. The most important change took place in 2009. It is 2 paragraphs, and I will be honest with you. It was all over in the news. People were reading about, Facebook changing the terms and conditions. And I was one of them. At that time, I was a student, and I read the terms and conditions, and I tried to understand what's the change. To be honest, at that time, I didn't understand what they meant. And possibly, most of the people didn't understand the change that Facebook was bringing to your data. So, and I read, Facebook is designed to make it easy for you to share information. So here, they sell to you that we make it easier for you to share your information with everyone you want. However, the default privacy setting was that everybody could have, or everyone could have access to your networks. And you had to change this privacy setting. So what does it mean that everyone had access to your information? It means that your information will be publicly available information and may be access to everyone on the internet, including people not logged into Facebook. This is what everyone means. Now, in 2009, at that time, we have a massive change. People who do not have an account on Facebook, they can access to your information. On the top of that, this information, it is possible for these third parties to index your personal information, even if they are outside Facebook. So this meant that third-party applications, they could have access to your data as long as you have the default privacy setting to everyone. And these third parties, they could process your data. In December 2009, we have a new change. And here, what do we see? We see that certain categories of information, such as your name, your profile photo, the list of friends, and pages you are a fan of, networks you belong to, will be considered by default publicly available to everyone, including Facebook enhanced applications. That was the period of time when Facebook started making real money. With this Facebook enhanced application, it allowed third companies to enter Facebook, to join Facebook, and to collect your data. Facebook privacy policy changed again in 2020. It says that when you connect with an application or website, it will have access to general information about you. What does it mean, general information? It means information about you and about your friends. It will be about your profile pictures, yours and your friends. It will be about your gender, your ID, your connection, and any content you share. Again, the default privacy setting was to everyone. So everyone had access to your information. And with that change here, even if you had a different private setting, you had a strict privacy setting, if one of your friends had forgot to change their privacy setting, this meant that through your friend, your data were subject to the processing of these third applications. Now, what do they know about us? Well, obviously, I have here a list, and this is not an exhaustive list. They know your username. They know your email. They know your name. They might know your address. They might know your networks. They have access to your photos. They have access to your videos. They have access to your tags. They have access to your location. They have access, with whom you chat on Messenger. They have access to your relationship status. Relationship status is quite sensitive. They have access to what you like and what you don't like. They can also understand your political affiliations. By the way, how can they understand your political affiliations? Because Facebook can have access to your browser. They can have access to the type of browser that you use. They can have access to the sites that you visit, even if you are not on Facebook. So if, let's say, you use Google Chrome and you have logged in on Facebook, and Facebook has your credential, but you are not on Facebook right now, and you read a newspaper, let's say New York Times or Washington Post, or here in Spain, El País, Facebook, through cookies, they know that at this time, although you are not on Facebook, you are reading and you spend time reading New York Times, or that you read the Washington Post. And this is how they can assume your political affiliation. Guess what? What did we say? We said that political affiliations, they are sensitive data about you. And only the companies that have explicit consent, they can have access to this data. More information about you. What else do they know? Well, they know even your GPS location, where you are right now. So they have an impressive amount of data. Why do they need that? They need that in order to advertise for marketing purposes. If they know what do you want, if they know what are you looking for instance, if you are about to book a trip in order to visit from Spain, Italy, or if you plan to visit the United States, they can send you an advertisement that will be tailored, that will be targeted, and it will be a perfect fit for you. This is how Facebook will make money. On the top of that, Facebook allows third-party applications to collect this data, and then these third-party applications, they pay for this data, and possibly they use them according to their business plan. So Cambridge Analytica entered in the system, collected thousands of data from people, names, political affiliations, addresses, Facebook usernames, and during the elections, given that they knew your political concerns, given they knew your political affiliations, they target some people with special with special advertisements without them knowing about that, and they managed to convince them, or we assume that they managed to convince them to vote with a certain way. So in reality, what do we have? We have a situation of manipulation where people were manipulated without knowing that. That was the situation of Cambridge Analytica, and this is why Facebook decided to change their privacy policy because it became a huge scandal. What about the data law of 1995? Unfortunately, the data law of 1995 didn't protect you. Why? Because the reach of that law was limited. It provided protection only for companies that had an establishment here in the EU, and only about EU citizens. Since Facebook had the establishment in the US, there was nothing they could do. However, we have the change of the law, and we have the Gdpr, the General Data Protection Regulation. What do we keep? We keep, first, that this Gdpr was a new law, and we needed that law for two reasons: technological advancement and globalization. When the old law was adopted in 1995, there was no Google, there was, we had possibly Microsoft Windows, internet was very slow, and, globalization was not that deep as it is today. But what did we see? We see that technological advancement with cloud computing, with 5G networks, with very fast computers, with the emergence of new business models, with startups, with social networks, they allowed the companies, to collect data from people around the world, and possibly under specific circumstances to take advantage over this data. So the GDPR came into force in 2018, and it was it is a very important piece of information. According to the GDPR, now companies do not have, in order to be bound by the law, it's not necessary for them to have an establishment in Europe. So every company, regardless of their establishment, whether they are in India, in Russia, in China, or in the US, they are bound by the GDPR as long as they collect data of EU citizens or of EU residents. And this is a big change. So we do not care from now on about the establishment of the companies. If a company collects data of European citizens, then they have to comply with the GDPR. So this is the first innovation, the first take from this law. Second, what if they do not comply with the law? We have a provision about a hefty fine. So these companies, if they do not comply with the law, they will pay 20 million, this is the maximum, or if we discuss about big tech like Google, Amazon, Facebook, it might be up to 4% of their annual global turnover. So what do we have here? We have here a force for compliance. If you do not comply with, if the companies that do not comply with the GDPR, there is a hefty fine. It can be 20 million, or if they are big tech, it can be the 4% of their annual global turnover. Second, the conditions of consent has changed and they have strengthened. Now companies, they had an obligation to change the wording in their terms and conditions. And they had an obligation to make it, more simple, more clear, and provisions that are easy for the people to understand. They had to clarify how they collect your data, with whom in particular they share the data, and what do they do. For instance, at that period of time, before the activation of the law, all these companies, they send emails to their users, and they explain what do they do with your data and how do they do that. For instance, Yahoo sent an email to everybody and explained that we collect data about your communications. We collect data from the content of your messages. We collect data not only from the content of your messages, but we collect data from the content of the attachment, and we share this data with third companies, for instance, Verizon. and Oracle. So it was pretty easy to understand what do they do. Just do that, go to the terms and conditions of the companies, of big companies like Yahoo, read the terms and conditions, and compare these new terms and conditions with the previous, with the old terms and conditions. I'm pretty sure that now it will be easier to understand what do they mean. I said and I confessed that in 2009, when I read the terms and conditions about the privacy of Facebook, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what they mean. What is a third-party application? What are they going to do with my data? It was difficult for me to understand, and I was a lawyer. Now, everything changed with the GDPR. All these companies, as long as they collect, they process data of EU citizens or of EU residents, they have an obligation to make the terms and conditions simple and clarify what do they do and with whom they share the data. The GDPR created new rights. It created your right to find out the amount of data that a company has about you, and all that free of charge. So if you're on Facebook, you can ask them to send you a file with all the data they have about you, and you will be surprised. Why? Because if you receive that file, you will find communications that you had with friends who left Facebook and disappeared from your messenger chat. You will find information and messages that you deleted on Messenger because you decided to delete a message, or by mistake you deleted a message. If you ask Facebook to send you your data, you will receive everything about you that will be free of charge. So this is an important information, an important right. Now you are empowered, you can know what these companies know about you. There is a second important right, and this is the right to be forgotten. On the top of that, you have the right to ask them to delete, to erase completely all the data that they have about you. Actually, this is based on a case that we have from the European Court of Justice. It was here in Spain when someone went bankrupt and a Spaniard was owing money to the social security services. And he was a businessman, and when he was conducting businesses, if people were Googling his name, they could find at Google, at the first page, that in the past he was bankrupt. And he wasn't very happy with that, because that was the situation of the past, and that was something very personal. And he didn't want people to know about that. So he asked Google to erase this information, to remove this information from their list. What happened? The European Court of Justice recognized that we have a right to be forgotten. We have a right to ask Google and all these networks, companies that they collect our data, to delete this data. So that was a very important development that was put explicitly in the new GDPR law. So GDPR, and GDPR is a very important piece of legislation. It is legislation about the future. It is a legislation, and I need to tell you, because I had communication with Facebook officials. What did they say to me? They said to me that they changed their terms and conditions and they complied with GDPR, not only about the EU, but at a global level. So, and this is very interesting because European Union became suddenly the international regulator about data and about new technology. So these companies, the big techs, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, they decided to change their terms and conditions at a global level and comply with GDPR. And that was an important victory, empowering our rights and our control over our data. Now, there is a catch. These Facebook officials, they said to me that, well, this is the rule, but for third countries, for countries outside the EU, like India, Brazil, we might conduct some experiments, behavioral experiments, because we are not bound by any law at these legal orders. What did we see the recent years, since 2018? Many regions, many countries, they have adopted data protection laws, including Russia, Brazil, even California. A couple of years ago, they adopted a law about data. So data is a new value. Why? Because companies can collect this data, and with the computational power, they can use this data in order to generate, in order to see, what we want. They understand what are our preferences, and this is money making for them. Let me clarify that. Let's assume that we have people who live in Madrid and they just moved to Madrid. And these people, they use Google because they have some concerns: where to go, what to do, where to eat, or what to buy. Or they have, they want to buy specific stuff, such as, specific shoes or specific clothes because it's cold here. These companies, they collect this data, and then they create a profile that every young person who comes to Madrid, the age 35 to 45, they have these concerns. So once you come to Madrid, before even these concerns are born inside you, these companies, they have this information, and they target you with special ads. So marketing has completely changed. Now companies with what we call big data, they can find out what you want, who you is, what you want to buy before you know that. And this is a revolution. And the companies that will be able to control the data, they will be able to control the future. They will have a comparative advantage in the market that will make them very strong. And the Gdpr, it is a law that can protect us, that can create a level playing field for all companies, where we will have a system fair for everyone. Thank you very much. It was nice to see you, but actually we have some questions, and thank you very much for this question. We have Alexis. Good data collector can be possible, like collect data to improve the user experience, not to control the user experience. Well, yes. This is, who is a good data collector? Who is a good data collector? A good data collector is someone who informs about, how they collected the data and what do they do with that data. As long as they inform you about how they are going to collect your data and you are happy with that, we are good. It is a contract. I joined Facebook because my friends are there, because it is important for my social interaction, and Facebook informs me about how they collect my data, and they do that in a proper way. So this would be a good data collector, as long as they comply with the law. So yes, we can have good data collectors as long as they comply with the law. We have the autonomy of the people. People, they have the power of their data, and if they decide to share their data with a third party, they should have the right to do it. But what do we say? We say that companies, they shouldn't abuse that power they have. That companies, they should treat fairly the people, they should inform the people. And this is GDPR. And GDPR is in that good direction. Any questions? We have a question from Ignacio. What will happen with Brexit if a company that collects store data is based in the UK and sells to all Europe? Yes, this company will be bound by the GDPR. They will have to comply with the GDPR. Although Britain will leave the Union, as long as they collect data from EU citizens, from citizens who live in Germany, from people who live in Italy, in France, they are bound by the GDPR. They have an obligation to comply with the GDPR rules. Yes, that is a very good question. So in reality, things will not change about data protection. Do we have more questions? We have a couple of minutes for more questions. Okay, no more questions. So it was fantastic to see you. It was nice to see you. Please stay because we have more and more interesting classes. Every class gives something new, and we hope that you enjoyed it and you ask questions and you clarify what is important for you. Thank you very much. Good to see you.